Varroxsan, the new kid on the block. You've probably heard of it once or twice in the last few months, and people are asking, is it any good or just more white noise? Well, I picked some up a couple of weeks ago, and I've been trying it a bunch as of late. So let's see if this treatment can take the crown from all the others, or if it can't hold a candle to the OGs. Well, let's find out. Now, before we get into the pros and the cons of it, let's first go over what it is and how to use it. So, what is Varroxsan? Now, I'm not going to go over everything that Varroxsan has in it. I'm just going to give you the basic breakdown of it. And Varroxsan is a slow-release treatment for Varroa mites. It actually uses oxalic acid, and it's impregnated into cardboard strips, so they gradually release the acid over time. It's designed to work over multiple brood cycles without a bunch of messing around and reapplying. So how do you use Varroxsan? First, always read and follow the labeled instructions completely. Do not guess. But this is the basic breakdown of how to use it. First off, determine how many strips you need. Typically, it's 1 strip per 2.5 frames of bees. Next, you fold the strips in half and you hang them in between the brood frames, like this here. You don't lay it on top of the frames. You want good contact so the bees are walking by and making good contact with the treatment. Now you leave the strips in the hive for about 42 to 56 days, or roughly 6 to 8 weeks, and this covers multiple mite life cycles. Now, an important step in the process is after you put it in the hive, you have to go back in a couple of weeks later and make sure the hive hasn't moved the brood away from the strips. If the brood has shifted and the bees have left the strips alone, you have to reposition them. You have to have good contact with the strips in order for it to work. But with that being said, let's go over some of the pros. And first up is it's a new treatment. And with a new treatment means less risk of resistance. Beekeepers have long worried that Varroa mites will become resistant to existing treatments. And it's true. Over the last few years, Varroa mites have become more and more resistant to common treatments from overuse or misuse of these treatments. Varroxsan adds a newer option in your toolkit, so you can rotate it or integrate treatments to help reduce that risk. Another thing is it's considered pretty natural. Oxalic acid is naturally occurring in plants and other things like that. So using it properly is considered more natural compared to synthetic miticides. And for many beekeepers, this is a big plus, myself included. Something else that I really like about it is it's pretty gentle on the bees. After installing the strips, the bees seem to get back to work very quickly. And from what I've seen, there's very little hive disruption, especially compared to other mite treatments like Formic Pro. And finally, you can use it with honey supers on. As long as you follow the labeled instructions, especially the spacing separation thing, Varroxsan is approved to use with supers on. And that's a big plus, especially if you don't want to pause honey flow or mess with your supers. But now that we got that out of the road, let's go over some of the cons. And first off is price. It is pretty pricey, and depending on how many hives you have, cost really adds up. For 1 hive, maybe it's not too bad. For 10 or 20, it becomes a serious investment. Next up is the installation process. It's pretty easy to understand how to do it, but it is pretty labor intensive, especially compared to easier treatments like Apiguard or even Formic Pro. You have to break into the brood nest, take off the supers, open the box, everything to get down to the bottom box to install the strips properly. Then you have to go back in a few weeks later and make sure the bees haven't moved away from the strips. For 1 or 2 hives, this is okay, but again, for large operations, this can become labor intensive. Another thing is it takes time. It's not like Formic Pro or its big brother oxalic acid, where you get immediate knockdown of the Varroa mites. Because it's a slow release product, the effect builds up over several weeks. And if your mite infestation is already huge, you may need something that works faster. But with all of that being said, what does Varroxsan get on the bee for you buy scale? Well, before I say my final rating, I want to say I've only used this a handful of times so far. So I will do another video in the coming months with my final rating, but this is what I'm giving it as of now. And like I said, it may change in the next video. But as always, I'm using my 6-factor method, which is ease of use, safety for the bees and queen, effectiveness, storage and shelf life, cost and value, and flexibility. And this is what it gets for each of those. For ease of use, it gets 5 out of 10. It's not hard to understand, but it requires careful installation and checks after a few weeks. For safety for the bees and queen, it gets an 8 out of 10. It seems very good so far, and I haven't seen any negative effects when used properly. For effectiveness, it gets a 6 out of 10 so far. It seems to do okay, and from what I've seen, it knocks the mites down pretty well, but not as fast as some of the other treatments, but time will tell with this. For storage and shelf life, it gets an 8 out of 10. From what I found, strips last pretty well, up to 24 months depending on the manufacture date. They're pretty stable under reasonable storage conditions. For cost and value, I'm giving it a 5 out of 10. Price is moderate, but whether it's worth it depends on your hive count and how much labor time you spend applying and rechecking. And finally, for flexibility, I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. It can be used most any time of the year, and it works with supers if it's done properly. It's not temperature sensitive, which is really great. And so that gives it an overall rating of about 7 out of 10 overall. It's a good product, it's promising, and it's nice to have something new in the toolbox. But it's not perfect with the rechecking and the more labor intensive than other treatments. But you guys know how it is. I give you a bit of the good, a bit of the bad, and a bit of my personal experience with it. But now I want to hear from you guys. Would you consider using Varroxsan, or do you think it's a waste of money? Drop a comment down below. I would love to hear.